welcome. I'm Councillor Emily Strudwick, the Chair of the Licensing Committee. I'm just going to go through some housekeeping safety information. If the continuous fire alarm sounds, please evacuate the room and the public gallery by the stairwells. Do not attempt to use the lifts. Please assemble at Queen Victoria's statue in Guildhall Square. In order to comply with the Guildhall Trust Fire Marshal regulations, anyone who signed in at the Guildhall reception desk should sign out when leaving the building at the end of today's meeting. This meeting is being live streamed, including those making deputations. Please can everyone use the microphones and remember to switch them off when you have finished speaking, otherwise the camera will remain on you. Members of the press and public are also permitted to record the meeting on the understanding that it neither disrupts the meeting nor records those stating explicitly that they do not wish to be recorded. I've got apologies for absence for Councillor Stuart Brown and Councillor Ben Swan. No more, yeah?
Raj Ghosh.
Perfect. Right, I'm going to go around and get everyone to introduce themselves. So let's start with Yinka, if that's possible.
Great. Yes, my name is Yinka Adeniran from Charles Dickens Ward. Thank you.
Tom Coles, Fratton.
Hugh Mason, St Jude Ward.
Councillor George Madgwick, Paulsgrove.
So I'm Councillor Lee Hunt and I represent Nelson Ward, which covers Stamford, Tipton and North End and some of Buckland along with Yinka there.
Richard Dare, also a councillor for Nelson Ward.
Dave Ashmore for Fratton Ward.
Abdul Kadir, Bappins Ward.
Ian Holder, St Thomas Ward.
Raymond Dent, Copner Ward. Chris Stoick, Paulsgrove Ward.
And then Ben.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Ben Attrell. I'm a solicitor employed by the authority and I'll be advising the committee today. Thank you.
Nikki Humphreys, Licensing Manager for Portsmouth City Council.
Bethan Clements, Transport Delivery Manager.
Alison Harper, Democratic Services.
Gerald. It's all right. Gerald, I'm guessing you're here for Stuart as a standing. Perfect. Yes, of course it is. Right, have we got any declarations of members' interest? There's many other seats you can choose from, Gerald.
Thank you. Technology, you need young people.
And then we've got minutes of the previous meeting. Do we agree? Perfect. Right. Just want to say apologies that it's only a one item agenda. We did think we have more time, but I did promise the trade reps that we'd get this on the agenda ASAP. So that's why we've still come for this one. I'm going to pass over to Nikki to open.
Sorry, Chair. Sorry to interject. I didn't quite hear if you asked for declarations of interest. Okay, perfect. My apologies.
Gerald took over with his broken microphone.
Thank you, Chair. Good morning, members. And I do apologise for the brief agenda, as the Chair has referred. But this item is for you to consider this morning the current statement of licensing policy for private hire and Hackney carriage licences. And this relates specifically to zero emission capability of licensed vehicles and determine whether an amendment to the policy is required. Currently, members, your policy says by 1st of January 2025, so next year, next January, all newly licensed vehicles must be zero emission compliant. So that's not hybrid, it is fully zero emission. Members, this decision was first, or this policy was first put into place in December 2020. You considered a report, or this committee considered a report from the Director of Regeneration and from myself to look at those amendments for taxi and private hire vehicles, and that the change to the policy was linked to obviously the cleaner air agenda, and that the then government's joint air quality unit confirmed that as a minimum we would need to put a policy requirement in the statement for zero emissions capable vehicles. That allowed the local authority to draw down 500 or 600,000 pounds worth of funding towards the infrastructure to support these vehicles within the city. However, there have been changes since you have implemented this policy, members. You will be aware, as it points out in 3.6 of the report, that the previous government amended their policy requirements to extend for manufacturers to produce zero emission vehicles from 2030 to 2035. And also you will be aware very recently that the Portsmouth City Council has announced itself that there's going to be funding, or funding has been provided for growing demand and changing infrastructure to support electric vehicles within the city. So really it's for you to consider today, and I have prepared 3 options for you to and obviously if you've got any other considerations, but I thought it was a good starting point. So you could have option A is that you retain the current policy, and there is some narrative there for you to consider that whether that is an appropriate position to retain given the changes that have occurred with the previous government's commitment to ZEC vehicles. Option B is to set back the date for a further 5 years. That's in line with obviously the government's requirements on manufacturers, and because we haven't got the infrastructure that we need at the moment to support fully electric vehicles in the city. By putting it back, it will give that project more time to establish, develop, and obviously with the additional funding that the authority has got to invest over the next 3 years. And your final option, members, for consideration is that you remove any reference in the policy to zero emission. But the comments there say that obviously the local air quality plan seeks greener vehicles, and to remove it completely from the policy may go against the council's general principles of where they want the city to go in the future. I just draw your attention, I'm not going to focus on them because they're from the Director of Finance comments about the potential issues should you retain the policy as it is, and the inherent risks that vehicles may choose to license themselves elsewhere. Bethan is here as well to answer any questions, because if it gets technical, I'm very sure that I'm not going to be able to answer those. So that's the situation as it is. Chair, you've got 3 options or any more that you wish to determine. Thank you.
Thank you, Nikki. Members, any questions? George?
Thanks, Chair. Firstly, an easy one just on from the minutes side of you. 7.1 Director's Report says 2005, not 2025. So just we need to update that for the minutes of the next meeting. On 3.7, you've mentioned about the £4 million in funding. Do you know if these are rapid charging points or just a continued rollout of the current charging points that we're rolling out? Do you know if there's a difference?
My understanding is that this will be on-street charging. I'm not the EV lead, to be clear, so this is will be open for all. We now have all rapids operational across the city that were planned as part of the original one. I can certainly go away and find out and let you know if any further rapids are going to be included.
Yeah, I think the issue I have, Chair, is that the charging points, I mean, the £4 million in charging points, the on-street ones are just not suitable for the commercial taxi trade. It would take them about 3.5 years to charge one car. So they're just not appropriate. You know, as an EV user myself, I've used these charging points and they're beyond useless. So, you know, they're not suitable for the taxi trade in any capacity whatsoever. The taxi drivers need the ability to roll up to a charger, you know, plug it in and have 20 minutes where they charge and get, you know, a good couple of 100 miles out of it. And the on-street ones just aren't suitable for that. It takes roughly about 12 hours to get a charge, and it's just not suitable. In relation to to option C, sorry, I'm assuming this would go, as you say, go against the current administration's current plans. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying, the current council's plans?
I think, yes, I would say that the underlying principles of the city is very clearly focused on making this city a greener city and in reducing emissions, because obviously we have got ministerial directions under us as well.
And my final question, I have got some comments later, Chair, but my final question for the finance is there any financial implications in taking option C?
There is a risk, because if that policy is retained, that vehicles may choose to licence and drivers to licence elsewhere if the cost of a fully
Option C is to remove, Nikki.
Oh, sorry, I'm all over the place, I do. Yeah, I guess that's the risk, that because the funding we have had I think Bethan might be able to fill a bit more about the funding.
I mean, obviously, at the moment, we have a ministerial direction to implement a clean air zone, which we're doing. That is funded through central government. The funding for the rapids that were provided and the original policy all stemmed from funding from central government. We're working through that with central government at the moment in terms of what the clean air zone looks like moving forwards. But on the policy note, our local transport plan, the daughter document, the EV strategy that's recently been adopted, as well as the air quality plan and the forthcoming air quality strategy, they're all pushing towards, you know, fleet renewal in effect. So there are quite a number of risks of option C.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think option C is a plausible option, but I just wanted to ask the question. Thanks, Chair.
Hugh, don't worry, I have seen you, Gerald. I'll come to you after.
Point 7.1, Director of Finance's comments. They are very general. It would be helpful to know something about the scale of the reduction to income to the licensing authority, which is stated there. Are we talking about thousands, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, or millions?
I think in the scale of the licensing budget, the annual revenue driven by private hire and hackney carriage is around 250,000, and that's based on us obviously licensing vehicles and licensing drivers. If we have a policy that does not encourage people to put vehicles on because they can't meet the costs of the electric vehicles as they are at the moment, and obviously those costs and the infrastructure isn't there as well to support them, there could be a likely risk that we will see either new vehicles licensing elsewhere, and a gradual drift as vehicles need to be changed, that there be a drift away from Portsmouth to other local authorities.
So it could be quite substantial for this authority. Yep.
I believe so. I believe so.
Gerald?
I think I'd just like to know what the trade think. Do we have people who could let us know?
We do indeed. You're more than welcome to. Thomas, Peter?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Gerald. The trade generally understand the necessity to move towards zero. But as I'm sure you'll understand, and I think Nikki has made clear, infrastructure's not there. The cost of moving towards zero emissions vehicles is extremely high and prohibitive to the trade by and large. I echo the comment that Nikki made. There would, I can guarantee you, would be a migration to other authorities if it was forced through. I have no doubt about that whatsoever from just talking amongst my Uber colleagues, and there's a significant number of those, as you'll appreciate. I, for one, and I drive a hybrid, but I, for one, would migrate. I would have no hesitation, and I've been with this council for more than 20 years. So, yeah, it's a serious consideration. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. I can say the same thing as Peter did, that financially it would ruin us. You know, the current vehicle I drive, if I wanted to change to a full electric one, the cheapest one used is £48,000, and that's the cheapest one in the country. So I'm sure you can understand that we cannot make that much money. And same as with the charging points, I think the closest supercharger is in Havant, or the other one is in Parkgate. So we would have to travel probably sometimes 10 miles just to get to a supercharger, because the on-street one, like Councillor Medrick said, takes 10 hours, 12 hours at least. So I appreciate there are some, but that's not enough. There should be specific charging stations for only taxis, I think, in the city, whereas in London they have the same, where only taxis or private hires can charge and the general public cannot do that. So yes, there would be a lot of drivers who can't afford to license a new vehicle with Portsmouth, so they would go to Havant and go to Fareham, where the licensing conditions are much more relaxed and much more easier. So thank you very much.
I'm sorry, Chair, if I can just come back on one thing. I would be interested, and I'm sure the members would be interested. I don't want to drop you in the middle of it, Nikki, but it would be interesting to know if, say, there was a 10% migration. It would be interesting to know what 10% relates to in terms of financial loss to the licensing department and thus the council. And you should keep in mind, members, that once a migration starts, migrations are very hard to stop. Okay, so these are the things that I think you should consider. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Lee?
Good morning. Thank you very much indeed. I wasn't clear what was being... I heard what was being said, but I wasn't clear. Were the deputations, were they referring to B? Are they content with B, or is it something else?
Would you like to?
Chair, thank you, sir. I think B, for us, is a sensible option. I think C is a non-starter. We understand the council has to go in a certain direction. I think enforcing A is equally a non-starter. B, to me, is a sensible option. Let's face it, we move it 5 years, and if things change and standards aren't met, it can be reviewed again, if necessary. But B is the only consideration I think you should even be looking at. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Gerald?
Thanks. Bethan, can I ask, what amount of subsidy has government provided for private hire or taxis to be able to transition?
Well, so as far as I am aware, the central government funded the rapid chargers. So there are now 6 rapid chargers in the city. Some of them have only recently opened, so I take the point that the infrastructure hasn't been there. Previously, these were only for taxis, but what we found is that they are underutilised by the taxi trade, and obviously that's understandable, so they have actually been opened up to members of the public as well. Now, that can be reviewed if we see an increase in taxi trade usage. So that's what the funding from central government has provided, specifically for the taxi trade.
Sorry, my question is what subsidy is coming to the guys here in terms of transitioning their vehicles? So what's the government done in terms of funding to help these guys transition to because they're very expensive vehicles. So what money has the government made available to help these guys do that transition?
At the moment, there is no further funding coming from central government. There has previously been funding through the Clean Air Fund when the Clean Air Zone went live, which was available to the taxi trade to upgrade their vehicles. But at the moment, specifically for the trade to go to EV, there is no funding available.
And sorry, Bethan, how much was it when the Clean Air Zone came in that was available to taxi trade?
I don't know that off the top of my head. Give me 5 minutes, I can find out.
That's all right. Members, any more questions while we're waiting for that?
Well, if there are no questions, I've got a comment.
Yeah,
I'm going to comment. Right, any more questions? Questions? No, fine. Okay, comment. Gerald, Hunt, and
Well,
Drake.
it seems to me B is the obvious thing to do. It's common sense thing to do. We need to be flexible and we need to take account of where things are. And these vehicles are very expensive. And maybe in 5 years' time we'll have to think again. But it seems to me the logical thing. We don't want to risk the government demanding all the money back, which is millions of quid, because that'd be very difficult. And B looks as if it is the least risk option. That means we take account of the need of the trade, but we also don't put the council's finances at risk. So I'm happy to propose B.
Yeah, I'd very kindly like to second that, if I may. I mean, thank you for the steer. Yes, it's B, clearly B. And I agree with everything that Gerald has said. What we have with all of these sorts of situations is it's always the same with government. You know, they always put the cart before the horse, or it's a chicken and egg situation. And in case of cart before the horse, we see that around building homes, not putting the infrastructure in, like GPs and dentists and so on, and HMOs crowding people in for not failing to build enough houses. In this case here, I think, if I remember rightly, Nikki, everybody, all diesel and petrol cars have to be gone by 2050. Is that correct? Is that still the target, I think? It's all right. I'm sure it's there. Anyway, eventually we are all going to have to be driving electric vehicles or something, or hydrogen vehicles, or whatever comes along next. So, you know, oil and petrol-driven vehicles and diesel-driven vehicles, although mine's got 300,000 on the clock and apparently is quite friendly to the environment because of its longevity, but and the same clutch. But the point is, we have to put the infrastructure in before these poor fellas here. I mean, it must be absolutely daunting, I would think, to be for your business and your livelihood, having to face all these massive costs with absolutely nothing on the horizon about how you are going to transition. I mean, it's pretty grim. You know, you've been told to do all these things, and then they tell you you've got to do all these. They tell us we've got to do all these EV points. I heard they were underutilised, so I hope that they will be, you know, when you find out where they all are properly, I'm sure you do, that they will be utilised. But I can't imagine the worry and the anxiety of the thought of having to fork out £50,000 for one car and all the other requirements that the licensing puts on the taxi trade for good reasons. But it is quite a task, isn't it? And what we're doing here by agreeing B is lining all the ducks up, for want of a better pun. But we must move, notwithstanding the fact that we were very ambitious trying to bring it to next year, and that was the right thing to do, to be ambitious. We must move away from carbon fuels I know electricity is also a form of carbon, but you can get it through green power, green energy. Really important we do that. We've seen all the floods across northern and central England over this last week, and it's extremely worrying. and Portsmouth has to do its bit too. So I know I've gone on a bit, but there's a lot to say. There's a lot of worry, a lot of anxiety. We don't know what this government's going to do, whether it's going to probably extend it again, you know, probably go on beyond 2035, because I don't see how this can all be implemented in the next 5 years. They've got so much on their plate already. We shall have to wait and see. But my reckoning is we'll be back again around about 2025 or thereabouts. About 2035 or thereabouts, looking at it again. So let's hope not. Let's hope that they get on with it and recognise that the climate change really is happening and everybody has to do something about it, and they can't just let us down here flounder and you to sink under a raft of regulation and requirements and cost.
Thank you, George.
Thank you, Chair. I think what we need to recognise is anything we put on this authority in relation to a timescale. I think, first of all, I think it's going to be pushed back. I think if we put 2030 here, it's going to go back and back and back anyway. And I think that what we need to realise is as soon as this is implemented in this council, we're going to see an influx of drivers leave and go cross-border, because the cross-border policy is rubbish. And we will still have these same vehicles, diesel and petrol, in this city. So this policy basically is redundant, in my opinion, because it's all you're going to do is encourage drivers to go elsewhere. They're still going to be driving in the city with diesel. It's not going to stop the policy. What really needs to happen is a national government change. That's what needs to happen, is the government needs to come down and say all authorities at the same time need to do this, because I guarantee you now at this second in time, in 2030 we will not be implementing this policy, because other authorities will not be implementing this policy, like our friends in Wolverhampton. So it's always going to be delayed until there's a national. I think everyone just nodded their heads there. I think this needs to be a national thing. So maybe yourself and Councillor Holder as Vice Chair can look at a motion to propose to send a message to the national government to try and get them to do a national change all at once. I think that's what's got to happen. However, I'd like to buck the trend slightly, Chair, and propose an option D. And I will propose this motion, and hopefully somebody seconds it, because I'll need a seconder. But option D would read exactly the same as option B, except from that date would say 2035. And I think that then is in line with the maximum time that's allowed under the current government policy, because if the government policy states they're going all to electric in 2035 anyway, then happy days, there'll be no issues. And once again, it means we won't have to be back here in 5 years to debate this and delay it again, which will happen. And furthermore, if the infrastructure is built within the city and we've got lots of rapid charging points and other councils are transitioning over, then we can move it forward. So we've always got the option to move it forward. We can say, right, as a city we're ready, we've now got rapid chargers, we've now got, you know, other councils involved, there's now funding for the drivers to transition to electric vehicles, so now let's move it to 2032, whatever. We can always move it forward. But as I say, I think that we should be setting the longest perimeter without removing it, because I think it does have to stay within our local plans, that it's still compliant within the administration's local air quality plan. But you've got to remember, the local air quality plan is irrelevant if cross-bordering is still allowed. There'll be no, do you know what I mean? There'll be no impact because drivers are just cross-board. So I'm going to propose an option D. Hopefully somebody in this room seconds it and we can go to that vote after the rest of the comments.
Chris seconded it, so you're welcome. I've got Tom, then Hugh, then Dave.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to say it's a red letter day. I agree with Councillor Hunt on most of his points there. I think option B is the sensible one. The option D is tempting. It is tempting, just because, as you say, we can move it forward. And I completely agree with Councillor Madrick's points on cross-border. It's just ridiculous that we set rules, then people can just go and whatever Wolverhampton do and come and drive around here anyway in whatever vehicles. But I'd be interested to hear what the trade reps think of option D.
I'm going to carry on with comments quickly before Hugh, just so I don't want to forget.
Yeah, our current policy would require all newly licensed vehicles to be zero emissions from about, 3 months' time. I think option B is the most sensible, but I think we should also note that we are disadvantaging people who have already made the switch in preparation for the 1st of January 2025. I note that there are a number of vehicles around which are either hybrid or are fully electric, which are licensed. And those people will be feeling slightly disadvantaged by this. Nonetheless, I think on the balance of advantage and disadvantage, we should go with option B, since this leaves us with a considerable amount of flexibility for the future.
Thanks, Chair. Totally agree with George there, Councillor Madrick there, over the national legislation needs to be changed for the cross-border. That's something out of our control, and it is much to our annoyance. I would also like to say, I think stuff that's come up about the lack of infrastructure, for example, and the lack of funding that's given to the trade, although there has been money given to the trade. I am looking over there to say it probably doesn't touch the sides, a lot of it. So that's all stuff that I hope, because we've heard some encouraging words from the current government about clean air, so that would be part of going forward with any clean air policies and help with councils on that. The only thing I would say about option D, and while it seems sensible to me, if I could just check with Nikki or maybe Beth in there, would that have a financial impact? Because option B does say it's being done to make sure we don't lose funding. Would that possibly have an impact on any funding that's already allocated if we were to change the date?
I don't have a yes or no answer to that, but if I can just backtrack to Gerald's original question about the funding, the amount of funding we've provided in government grants to the taxi trade to upgrade their vehicles is $500,000, just over 500,000. And that was to enable the taxi trade to be compliant with the Clean Air Zone. So that doesn't mean that they had to upgrade to electric vehicles. They had to upgrade to at least, I think it was Euro 5 vehicles, or Euro 6. So that is the level of funding that government have given us for the taxi trade, in addition to funding all of the rapid charges across the city. At the moment, we have no spending from the Clean Air Zone, subject to the targeted feasibility study that's ongoing at the moment around the performance of the Clean Air Zone. So any money that we hold at the moment, we are not spending it at all until we are provided further advice from central government on what our next steps are and what that means in terms of funding. In terms of financial risk or any other risk, I suppose the only thing I would say is that the Clean Air Zone exists because we've had a ministerial direction. We have been told to do this by central government. So what that looks like with an option D, I don't know. It's more than just taxis at the end of the day. We have talked to central government about this paper, about these proposals. They are largely quite relaxed about it and recognise the challenges that there are at the moment. But obviously what we did say was 2030. So yeah, we'd have to just double check that there's not going to be any clangers that we aren't aware of, but they seem to be pretty relaxed about it.
Dave, do you have another follow-up at all, or no? Councillor Hunt?
Yeah, I mean, I get all this, and I know Councillor Madrick sounds attracted to the taxi trade. We've got a much wider brief than this. Forgive the pun. If we take our foot off the gas, what we do is we increase the chances of central government looking at Portsmouth saying, you're not serious about reducing carbon emissions in your city. You've extended this by another 5 years, and therefore we will impose a citywide zone on you in order to make sure that you reduce your carbon emissions. That is the risk that option D gives us, is to actually impose the controlled zone right across the city. And everybody then will have to pay. And they might bring in cars for all I know. I haven't got a clue. But this option D hasn't been briefed, and it's much better to go with option B.
Gerald?
Thanks. Until a couple of months ago, I did the transport brief. And George's proposal, if we were looking at the licensing trade, is quite attractive. my worry with it is, if we go with option B now, we have the ability to make it longer in later years if we so wish. We know that JACU are looking at our clean air zone. I don't think they can extend the size of it because it's designed just to be the areas of exceedance. But they could choose to increase the number of categories of vehicles that were hit. And the next set on the list, I think, are private cars. And this is government imposed. We don't get any discretion about this. So I think if we take a wider view, I wouldn't want to do anything that gives that bit within government an excuse to widen the number of vehicles that get hit to the very big number of private vehicles in the city. And thinking of where the clean air zone is in the middle of the city, it would hit people in the poorest parts of the city the hardest, and people on the lowest incomes who therefore can't afford to have as modern cars. So I have great sympathy for what George has suggested, but it seems to me what option B does is to give us a way forward that gives another 5 years, and it without risking JACU being difficult and imposing a clean air zone that is will cause people in the city more problems. So I think it's something we might be able to do is to come and look at it later. But I would counsel that at the moment I wouldn't do anything to scare the Joint Air Quality Unit into the risk of us having a stricter clean air zone imposed on us, hitting more people. I think we all want to get to the same place. It's just in terms of tactics, and I think the tactics need to be aware not just of the need of the trade, but also the need of everybody else in the city.
George?
I think we just heard quite a few scare tactics there. I don't think Gerald's, I mean, you've been in this game a lot longer than me, but I don't think that they would come in and implement something just boom like that. They will come and say to us, we're not happy with this policy, blah, blah, and they'll give us time to look at it. I think, you know, we just heard from the finance officer that they've taken a very relaxed approach, that the clean air zone is not just about the licensed trade, it's about the city as a whole. I'm glad you just poo-pooed the Lee's comments about it being extended and getting wider, because that was just silly. But I think that at the end of the day, the government need to understand and realise, Councillor Vernon-Jackson, that I think they'll be reasonable, as they said they've been very relaxed about it, is that, you know, it will not impact the clean air zone, because drivers will just go to other cities like Havant in Fareham and stuff like that, and they'll just come back and drive in the city. So the clean air zone won't actually be improved at all by sticking to that. You know, yeah, you agree, yeah. So I think that, you know, and this is why I say option D. I think it sends a clear message, and I think if they do come back, we can argue the cross-border policy. And as I say, and they can, if they're really wildly unhappy, I mean, we've just heard that they're taking a very relaxed approach, so hopefully they still do. And if they don't, we can amend it. They're not going to just take over the council's policy.
Councillor Hunt?
I'm very sorry. I mean, we're debating, of course. This is not arguing. The truth is the government can do things without telling anybody or doing. They introduced the cuts to the winter fuel allowance without warning anybody. Nobody knew about it until it was announced, and it was policy. It was done there and then. They can do just the same here with anything that they wish because they are the government and they are ministers. I think, and Councillor Madge, with the greatest respect, what would have been better is if you had this option D in your mind, that you'd have sent it to the officers in good time so they could have come and commented on it today. You kind of like gate crashed the place with this option D, and it sounds very attractive. But sometimes things that sound attractive don't always work out well. So if you'd have sent it in, we might have been able to, we would be able to understand the implications, the full implications of what you're saying. I think we've all agreed, we actually don't know. The officers certainly don't know, and they've said so. So we can't make a decision about option D without the proper information. I doubt you had to bring this, I understand, today because the policy had to be done, so it's to be done urgently. And Councillor Gerald Van Jackson is quite correct that if, when we get towards 2030, it needs to be amended again, then it can be looked at again, depending on what the government has decided to do. But really, to risk things, as Gerald has described, by going out on a limb and taking a risk for other issues, is really not sensible and is a bit reckless. Well, it is reckless, truthfully.
Oh, Gerald, then Yinka.
Could I suggest a compromise? So, Councillor Magic, I think we all know that the licensing laws as they are now are just ludicrous. And it would be a good idea for us, maybe as a committee, to write to the new government to ask them to look again to make sure that they have something that is not a Victorian thing, but something that is 21st century. And the current laws are nuts. But I wonder if the compromise might be, because we don't know what their reaction to a longer period than 2030 would be if we go for 2030 now, but ask Bethan to go and talk to Jacko and then come back to the next meeting to say, if they are relaxed and don't mind a 2035 date, then we could revisit it, and we can do that without risk.
Gerald, 3.5, it does say hybrid or fully electric by 2030 and fully electric by 2035. So I don't know if that's already answered your question. It looks like they're happy for 2035.
Okay, so
It's on 3.5 if you wanted to.
Okay, let me have a look again. But I thought that the paper was written, so let's put glasses back on. The paper was written to say that people had checked with about 2030 and that was fine, but not longer. So what paragraph you got?
3.5, and then also it says on 3.6, again, it's giving you the variation of 2030 to 2035.
And so my understanding is that is the context of the national decision. The issue here we have is different because we need to take account of what the Joint Air Quality Unit say about our clean air zone. So all I'm suggesting is if we go for 2030 now and then ask Bethan to go and ask the Joint Air Quality Unit about our particular circumstances, and it might be that my fear it disappears at that point, but it's best to see if we could check.
Yinka?
Thank you, Chair. I just want to buttress what Councillor Lee said, and then my suggestion is just to work on the options we have right now, and then B is the most sensible one. And we still have a long time. This is 2024, and then we're talking about 2030. So moving it fast forward to 2035 is something we can review later. So if you go with option 2B now. So I just want to say my view. Thank you.
George?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy if the licensing team here, as in all of the members present, are happy to sign a joint letter that expresses our opinions and concerns in relation to this and gives clarity. So we do it as a united front. So we send a letter to the DFT and say, this is what our opinion is, it needs to be blah, 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 blah. That would save going through a motion as well. So if everybody's happy to do that through and I say unanimous, and the officers are happy to go and look or ask the question, then I would be happy to
withdraw my proposal for option D. Hopefully all the members here are united in a letter going out.
I'll sign anything.
I'll bring your checkbook.
I don't have a checkbook.
Do I have any more comments, members? No? Okay, so Tom, you look like you were going to.
I was just going to ask if a letter would need proposing and seconding officially, or...
I have no idea.
Legal advice?
I think we've already had a proposal and a seconder for option B.
Ben, we're on about the letter.
It's just simply that that be amended. I propose, I would imagine, if you want to seek a proposal for that from Councillor Madgwick, that be seconded.
Okay. I mean, we
I'm happy to take that suggestion on, George. But we just need to see a draft, and we just need to work
okay,
it
well,
through.
let's. I think the best idea would be, yeah, let's vote on the current thing, and then we can add in an additional.
Yeah, I think the proposal and amendment has been put forward, so I think you vote on that proposed amendment first, and then if that fails, then you go back to just the straight option B. But you're talking about an additional letter that everybody seems to be accepting is
fine. So you want to do the amendment first, yeah?
Except I'm happy to accept it. So.
Right, B is amended. George, Councillor George Madgwick.
Before you take any votes, if I could just make a point. It's not controversial and it's not going to affect anybody's voting in any way, but there has been discussion of funding and income to the authority as a result of changes. I think all the members of the licensing committee will be well aware that licensing budgets are ring-fenced. But I think as a matter of public perception, if anybody outside is watching today's broadcast, they might get the impression that the general fund might somehow be affected by the loss of trade or the loss of licensed drivers or vehicles in the city. That's not the case. It will mean a reduced licensing function, so loss of capability in the licensing department, because obviously there's less income coming into the licensing department, but the income for licensing can only be spent on licensing matters. I think the other important thing is that obviously if fewer drivers are licensed in the city, then there is less control by Portsmouth City Council and Portsmouth City Council's licensing department of drivers in the city. And as Councillor Vernon Jackson has alluded to, it is a ridiculous situation with the legal situation and cross-border hire, but unfortunately we are where we are. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ben. George?
Just to be a stickler for rules, so just to confirm, I'm withdrawing the option D proposal. And I think we should vote on an amendment because I just think it's better to be safe than sorry. So I think we should see the amendment at the end, basically at the bottom of option B will read that the licensing committee will propose and deliver a letter to the DFT with our shared views that we've discussed today, essentially. If that's okay. And obviously I think Gerald was happy to second that. And then I think we should have a vote on that and then vote on
Fine. Perfect. So we'll go for a vote on the amendment. If you are for the letter. Perfect, unanimous. And then we'll go to the vote on option B, which was proposed by Gerald, seconded by Councillor Hunt, if we want to vote on that. I thought nobody wanted to vote then. Perfect, so that's approved for option B. Amazing. Right, I will close off the meeting now at 11:49. Thank you.